Quick disclaimer before the video begins. I am not going to show you a lot of videos or photos about what's happening because they may compromise the security of the people that has been appearing in them. And well, this is Colombia. Things happen to people who are recognized. And also because they have some gruesome content. And if you want, you can look at them on Twitter, or you can just ask around or ask me and I can show them to you if you want. Let's begin. Alright, welcome to Red Comunitaria. This will be a channel in which I will speak about Colombian and other issues that are interesting to me. So, yeah. Let's start talking about the Colombian protests. They are right now at the beginning of the end. They have reached an agreement with the government, some of the institutions. So our trucker unions are starting to proceed with normal operations. So yeah, we will lose that. And with that, transport infrastructure will continue as per usual, losing one of the greatest leverages that we had. So yeah, this is the beginning of the end. In order to explain why the protests have been so intense, why they have been working the way they have been going on for more than a month, let's start by talking about the boring things and the interesting things. The boring things are economics. It is important to be in a context of explaining this context. Well, Colombia is a deeply unequal country. With the census of 2018, a friend and I did some tables using the statistics present about economics. Well, this is coupled with the fact that our statistics department did a study of social classes in Colombia, and they discovered that there were basically 4 social classes. They are the destitute, the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class. In order to be considered destitute in Colombia, you have to earn less than 300,000 pesos, so less than even $100 in your entire household per month. In order to put that in context, this chair costed almost the same that you would earn being destitute every month, and this desk costed me more than that. So you can imagine how small that amount is. In order to be considered lower class in Colombia, you have to earn 600,000 pesos or less. So that is still less than 2/3 of the Colombian minimum wage. This is coupled with the fact that less than 50% of the Colombian working population has a contract. So Colombia is a country in which most of the population works informally, and as such they earn less than minimum wage. So that is the barrier for the lower class, 2/3 of the Colombian minimum wage. In order to be considered part of the middle class, you have to earn between 600,000 and 3 million pesos. That is between 160 around $1,000 US. So, well, this gap is incredibly big, and there will be a lot of differences in lifestyles in this class, because some people don't even earn minimum wage. I am part of what you would consider, by those statistics, part of the Colombian middle class. I am a specialist worker in that I have one skill that is not very common in this country, and that is that I am bilingual. As such, I am a call monkey. I am part of the increasingly big industry of outsourcing call centers to developing countries. This gives me a relatively good wage in Colombian standards. I can rent my own place, it has more than one room, so this is my office, not my room per se. And well, you can see I have some luxuries. I have shirts from bands that are not heard around here. And this means that I have somewhat of a disposable income. So yeah, I am part of the upper middle class in Colombia, and the upper class is from 3 million pesos onward in your entire household each month. And this is basically farcical, comical, and depressing at the same time, because in Bogota 3 million pesos basically amount you to have the same lifestyle that I have here right now. I'm living in Neiva, a relatively small town, 400,000 people. And in Bogota, this, well, 3 million pesos would serve you to live to have a rent in a very good place, but not to have the upper class lifestyle. People consider that in Colombia, in order to have a good living standard, you have to earn around 7 million pesos in your entire household. So, yeah, you can guess. That amount is incredibly big in Colombian standards. As I mentioned, I had a friend in which we did some statistics, and the analysis showed that basically in the entire Colombia, in the entire Colombian territory, only the upper 5% of Bogotanians earn 7 million pesos or more. In other towns, the income gap between the richest 5% and the 5% of richest Colombians is still very big. In some places, the gap is as low as 5 million pesos. Me and my roommate would earn more than that. So basically, we would be considered an upper class household, even if we are just roommates. And this place would be too costly for us to rent by ourselves. These are the extremes of Colombian inequality, and this is linked with the protest because, well, in Colombia, there are tax reforms every presidential period. We and my friends have joked that they are basically dos por periodo, which means that there are 2 tax reforms per presidential period. This is tragically correct. Since the 1960s in Colombia, there have been 2 tax reforms every presidential period, and the only exception being this government, in which there were 3 tax reforms proposed. 2 approved, 1 proposed. The tax reform that was going to be applied, the last one, was, well, died because of the protests. So what did this tax reform entail? Well, if you earn more than 2.5 million pesos by yourself, with some statistics, with the analysis that we did with my friend, based on the census of 2018, this means that around 25% of Colombian households earn more than that, but taking into account that we are talking per household, the amount would be closest to 15%, taking into account that in a lot of Colombian households, most people don't earn, most people that would earn that much would do it by themselves, because, well, this is still a very patriarchal society and women don't tend to work a lot. In some households at least. And as such, 15% of the population would be affected by this tax reform. The bar would be lowered by a considerable amount for this income tax. So a lot of people protested. The government said that it was going to be offset by giving some subsidies. If you earned less than minimum wage, you'd be eligible for a subsidy of around 300,000 pesos twice per year. So this is still a comically small amount. But even then, around 10 to 15% of the Colombian population would see their income double like this in those months, the destitute population. This is tragic in the end. People went to the streets because of this. because also the bar was supposed to be even more lowered, to be lowered even more by the amount of year of time that has passed. So yeah, it was depressing to say the least. Well, as I live in Neiva now, I'm from Bogota, I'm accustomed to 20 degrees, so please give me a moment to refresh myself a little bit. And I will tell you about the social and cultural reasons why people are protesting right now. Just give me a minute. It's 30 degrees outside and I'm dying in here. I'm editing now, so I forgot to mention this on the video, but if you're thinking on supporting someone on the protests economically, I'll ask you to please support the Trans Community Network. They're one of the most important queer institutions in Colombia, and they got evicted from their place, and as such, they are looking to buy a new one. I'll leave the link to the fundraiser in the description. And also, there is a company that is selling some shirts if you want. All of the proceedings will go to the Trans Community Network. That was all. So let's go back to the video. Okay, I'm back now. I'm about to die. I thought maybe refreshing for 5 minutes was enough. It isn't. So yeah, let's talk about the social and cultural reasons. I will divide the social reasons in three. Let's talk about Venezuelans, minority populations, and, well, tax evasion, the favorite Colombian pastime of them all. So, Colombia right now has one of the biggest immigrant populations relative to their population in the planet. The Venezuelan migration is incredibly big. You basically can't go to Bogota without having to deal with Venezuelans in the informal economy every 2 or 3 blocks. It's a complicated situation. Xenophobia has been on the rise, and my family comes from Cucuta, a place that is in the Venezuelan frontier, and was considered to be, its economy was based in smuggling and trade with Venezuela. So a great part of my family is Venezuelan. I was even about to get a parallel legal existence in Venezuela before the crisis began, because my family wanted me to have it, because we were living in the frontier. And as such, I have seen both sides of the coin. I am incredibly aggressively Bogotanian, so you can't see my Venezuelan heritage or anything like that. And my family has had to go to different places, both legally and illegally. I have family in a lot of places. And let's just say that some of those places have had complicated relationships with Venezuelans, especially in South America. Going to I heard it was a terrible experience. Peru and Ecuador are increasing their fight against Venezuelan immigration, and as such, transport is becoming both more dangerous and more complicated for Venezuelans. So a lot of them have to stay in Colombia, as we are the first country in which they have to stay. Basically, we can't control the border because it's incredibly big, and a lot of it is in inhospitable terrain. So you can just go to a dirt road from Arauca to Apure, for example, like FARC did, or you can go in the deserts, or even in the legal passes. So yeah, it's complicated. A lot of people are blaming Venezuelans for the ills of this country. They don't have the fault, they are also victims in all of this. And well, they protest because of this. The situation is incredibly complicated for them, and xenophobia has complicated levels. After that, there are other minority populations. Minority populations in Colombia aren't a monolith, but they can be classified more or less in two: indigenous populations and Afro-Colombian populations. So both aren't a monolith. They have different experiences, conditions, places where they live, all of this. So let's start by talking about some indigenous populations that have been the most affected by, that they are leading the protests because of this. Most of them are located in the Cauca, a province that has been basically considered an apartheid province in Colombia, because you can see a clear divide between the part that is controlled by indigenous populations and the part that is controlled by the traditional elite. So, well, indigenous populations in Colombia have had a lot of respect for their autonomy and independence since 1991, when the last Colombian constitution was changed. But still, the fight for indigenous rights is not over, and this has come with a lot of conflicts with settler communities. The fight for sovereignty doesn't end up with recognizing and achieving the land in which you live is part of indigenous populations. It has to go a lot further. So, even with the land reclamation projects, with successful land reclamation projects, some communities have had to fight with colonies for land and for different situations. I plan on one day giving you a first-hand view of one of these ethnic conflicts in San Andrés de Pisimbala, a town in Cauca. If you manage to be interested enough and you want to invest in me having a Patreon so that I can keep working and start going across the country to tell these kinds of stories, I would love that. I will leave a link to my Patreon in the description. So, well, let's stop with the shilling and let's talk more about that. Indigenous populations have had a lot of fights, especially the NASA community. The NASA community has been somewhat of a representative of the indigenous fight in Colombia. So much so that they have developed basically their own paramilitary force to defend themselves, the indigenous guard. So they are incredibly militant to defend their own rights, and as such, people are much more willing to fight with them with the basic and usual Colombian way, with machete and a gun. So basically in Cauca, it's constant. The massacres are constant, the dead are constant, the fights are constant. A lot of indigenous people die every day because of that. Before the protest began, in Cauca there was, the leader of one of these communities that we call cabildos here, was murdered. And after that, a week after that, there was a siege on a small set of households. So, these are kind of things that are happening every day there, but they were intensifying in the last few months and days. So the Indigenous Guard has been a great part of fighting the protests. They are basically the ones who control the southwestern Colombia now. They have blocked the roads and they are fighting with the protesters against the agents of the state. And violence is big. In that place, basically civilians are helping the military kill other acute protesters, and protesters have been retaliating too. So it's a complicated situation there. Other indigenous populations don't have it as hard, like the Wayuu, who basically control their own province, but still need a lot of recognition for their economic precarity of their province. It has been incredibly affected by corruption by both indigenous and settler communities. And well, there are other communities that have been very intense in this fight, mostly that I remember the Misak people that lives also in Cauca. They have been, as they are less, they are a relatively small community with only 30,000 people. They have been doing mostly symbolic gestures, mostly tied to the destruction of statues in a lot of places. And let's not forget that is good. Mostly linked to colonies from the colonial period. And as such, well, most people are supporting that. Um, so yeah, this is more or less the indigenous stakes that people have in these societies. After that, there is the fight of Afro-Colombian populations. Colombia is one of the countries in the continental landmass, with the biggest Afro populations, but still it's mostly invisible in Colombia. They are basically relegated to their own provinces, and they also have basically their own apartheid states there, against the indigenous population, of course. So it's complicated, the situation is nuanced and incredibly complicated, but still, Afro-Colombian populations need their rights to be recognized, and they are fighting also for recognitions and their own rights to be respected, and also for the improvement on their social and material conditions. And now let's go to the fun part, tax evasion. Tax evasion is basically a hobby in Colombia, almost everyone does it, where either knowingly or unknowingly. A lot of the economy is also based in cash, so it can be traced. And as such, the economy has always been, one of the interests for the Colombian economists has always been to increase the tax base. But let's just say that when you don't control the land, you can't even control the people. And even when you control land, you don't always control people. As you can see in Bogota, a lot of Bogota doesn't have places where you can get it, when you can collect taxes, because well, people will get you out, not very politely. They just say that. So yeah, these are the social reasons. And now let's go to other cultural reasons. Colombia is part of a highland country in which populations have been separate for a long time, and as such are fiercely independent from the central government. So when the central government tries to interfere with them, they fight. And the fights get bloody. We have spent around 200 years in continuous civil wars because of this. And it won't end soon. Even confederation wouldn't be enough, so you can guess. Aside from this, there is the fact that people just don't trust the government enough. A funny thing about Colombian leftists is that a lot of them think that the answer to the Colombian quandary of the people against the state is having more of a state, but also a benevolent one. But Colombian history and even literature about Colombian society and conditions have shown that most of the population used to live outside of the reach of the state, and as such are accustomed to fight against it, against statization. So people will always be fiercely independent around that. I have seen places in which the fight against the state is big. I have been also in an indigenous cabildo where the fight against the state was by both guerrillas and indigenous populations. And even if the indigenous populations and the guerrillas fought against each other, both also try to fight against the state in some ways, either by violent action or not. So, I'll also try and get a video about that when the time comes. So yeah, these are more or less the reasons why the Colombian protests have been happening. Also, they are about to end, because, well, after the agrarian strike of 2013, in which most small household farmers in the country fought against the state because of the price of agricultural produce, they're also doing it now because the issue is not about import, it's not about production, but about globalization in the end. Farmers trying to get back to old school protectionism. Well, the rest of the population would say no because, well, we live in a globalized world, and the price of goods is absurdly big in Colombia, even more if we return to have even more tariffs. So, yeah, this is more or less what has been happening there. After the strike, the president in that time, Santos, the architect of peace, tried to get basically a consistent group of people in which they could talk about protests and how to solve them. What happened is that here in Colombia, most people don't even know who these people are, who they represent, and a lot of them are part of either trade unions or some associations that don't represent the people. Let's remember that in Colombia, more than 50% of the population is not employed in formal employment, and also they can't have unions, and even people who have formal employment are part of industries in which unionization attempts would just simply end up in you being replaced by other people because there is ample manpower. For example, I'm not in a union because of this. As such, the fight for unionization and these kind of things is kind of apart from the main population, and as such, people don't feel represented in the negotiation table. But even then, the protests are going to end because some of the unions have been giving concessions. As such, even if most of the people want to protest, they won't be able to do it without the support of some of those key industries, mostly the trucker unions, or at least associations. They are some of the most aggressive people that aim to fight in protests, and also they control the key infrastructure needed for transportations of goods and services in Colombia. And in this country, transportation of goods and services is incredibly hard because of our terrain. So, yeah, this is why resuming activities by trucking unions is bad for the protests. Let us see what ends up in this situation with the employees of the unions and with the average protester. I'll keep you updated about that. So thank you for staying so long with me, and well, this was a little unscripted video about a thing that interested me a lot. I will keep talking about some of these issues in the future. As I mentioned, if you want to keep supporting me, I will be infinitely grateful with you. And I will also, as this country has a really small standard of, well, it is really cheap to live in here. My income gap to start working doing this will be somewhat low. So I hope I can do it as soon as I can with your support. Thank you so much, and goodbye. This was Red Comunitaria Trans. Have an excellent weekend.